today's Planning Commission meeting. We'll get started here in a moment. Before we get started on our public hearings for the cases today, we have a couple of presentations. First is on the Community Master Plan, first round of engagement update. And I don't remember who's going to be leading us in that. You want to help me?
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. As you saw on your agenda, we are providing an update to a round one of engagement of the Community Master Plan process. Earlier this week, Sarah Bongiorno from Planning Next, who is the lead consultant for the process, gave a similar but abbreviated presentation to the City Commission at the Committee of the Whole meeting. Also, a similar update was provided to our steering committee yesterday afternoon, and we did a deeper dive and some further activities on that. And then also we're here today to provide you with an update. The project or process itself is divided into several phases, but there are 4 rounds of engagement. The first round is collecting those big ideas, you know, tell us stories, what matters to you being a resident or someone that works here in the city of Grand Rapids. And so we'll be using that data and that information that then we will build upon into the second and subsequent rounds that we ultimately conclude with the 4th round, which is the adoption phase, where we would ask for specific feedback and input on the draft recommendations of the plan itself. So that's sort of the trajectory of the remaining process, but we asked Sarah to be here today to provide you with the presentation, the recap of round 1, which largely focused on the launch parties that we had, as well as the work of our community connectors and our neighborhood organizations. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah, and I'll also note that Leila Zani is also here from the Planning Department. She's been the project manager for this process, so if there are questions following up, I think the 3 of us will be able to capably handle that. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Good afternoon. Sarah Bongiorno with Planning Next. I'm serving as the project manager for the consultant team, working closely with Kristen and Leila and the rest of the planning department. So we're really excited to be here sharing an update. We just got through a major milestone, which is that first round of engagement. And so I'm going to share a little bit about who we heard from and what we heard at a high level, give you a flavor of kind of what we're hearing from the public in this first round. And then at the end, I'll give you a little preview of what we're ramping up for our second round of engagement coming up in May. So this is hopefully a review for most of you, but if anyone's watching or in the audience, what is a community master plan? It is a blueprint, right, for how the community grows and evolves, be set forth by this body, the Planning Commission, adopted by City Commission. It really is giving the community a chance to pause and take stock and define this long-range vision. The planning horizon is typically 20 years. And the master plan is focused on the physical development of the community. We are looking at topics such as what's happening to your population, your economy, the housing needs, and transportation facilities and land use and how all that works together. And we feel strongly as we want to make sure it's clear that a good, solid community master plan is integrating a solid technical analysis with the robust public input, as with this first round is one part of that. And we all know it's necessary for the valid zoning ordinance. This is our process diagram, and we're right here, ending the, we just wrapped up the phase 1, we're beginning to phase 2. So we did a first round of engagement. We're now working with that input to frame up vision and values, working closely with the steering committee to prepare for a second round of engagement in May. We'll then continue to dive into the topics that are most important and the themes that we need to address in the plan through the summer and early fall, back out in November-ish, what we're thinking right now, for a third round of engagement, and then continuing to refine to go back out in public sometime in the spring for adoption next summer. So it is a long process, but we're at the beginning with the public, but we feel really good about the input that we've gotten so far. Our engagement overview, we are planning, as you just saw, 4 rounds of equitable, inclusive, productive, and hopefully fun engagement for the community. Kristen kind of hit on this, but it does move from the more generative, brainstorming, open-ended questions, what do people think, what's on people's minds, and then we use that input. It's iterative, right? We use that input to then frame up the framework for the plan, the vision, the values, the goals, and then specific recommendations. So as we move through the process, it does get more responsive. So we'll have still engage in the community, but we're asking for their feedback in reaction to something that we've created. Are we on the right track? Did we miss something? Did we interpret what you said correctly? And of course, it's focused on the topics within the Community Master Plan purview. So for this first round, we had over 760 people participate. We conducted engagement in a variety of formats. We had in-person workshops. We had meeting in a box kits. We had one-on-one interviews. We intentionally engaged youth. We had an online engagement portal, and we also had stakeholder meetings. Our partners over at Good Marketing, they helped, helped to do a PR campaign. We felt that was positive. We got good coverage. There were TV spots, radio spots. We had the steering committee out, distributing information and trying to get the word out so that everyone knew it was an opportunity to get involved. We did hear from people living in all 3 wards. We feel good about that. We looked at the geography across the community. When we went out to all of these different formats, we collected some demographic information. It was, of course, self-selected. People could opt in. It was anonymous, but we had about 80% return rate on those tell us about yourself section of the work. And so the data that you're going to see, the demographic data reflects that. So that's how we know we reached a representative engagement. So I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. You can see the purple line is the Grand Rapids, the census percentage of a particular, in this case, the race and ethnicity in the community, and the green line is our participation within this first round. So you can see there's a few gaps that we're going to be more intentional about moving forward. We worked with the steering committee last night to brainstorm on how we can close some of those gaps. You can see some of the younger, that elusive 18 to 24-year-old age group and the youth. We did get some, which is good, but we're going to continue to work at that. Same with the educational attainment. We had a sort of more highly educated group turn out, but we have some strategies and tactics that we're going to use moving forward to try to get to full representation of the community. We did hear from folks were asked what neighborhood they reside in. So if they provide that information, this is a listing, and it's ranked in order from highest engagement to lowest. So Creston folks really came out, Heritage Hill, Garfield Park, and so on. So we feel good about reaching many different neighborhoods as well. So we had 6 different engagement activities as part of this first round. And I'm going to just explain each one before I provide some of the input that we received. This is like hot off the presses. We were receiving information back even late March. So we feel good about looking at all of it, and we've got a good handle on it, but we're going to continue to use this input as we start to move into more of the analysis and digging into some of these topics. We're going to go back and say, what do people say about that? We'll pull that input back out and keep digging and looking at it. This is a very cursory, higher level feedback today. So the first activity was a hopes and dreams card. It was kind of like a half comment card. And people were asked, what are their hopes and dreams for the future? What do you hope Grand Rapids will be known for in the next 10 or 15 years? And these were some of the themes that came out of what people shared in their little statement on their hopes and dreams card. So equity was definitely something we heard across the board in many different ways. Increasing economic opportunity. A lot of comments about vibrant and inclusive city with places for people to hang out, amenities and safe spaces for people to spend time in. Housing came up often with the idea of equitable development, transportation, different transportation opportunities, sustainable development, protected green space, this idea of diversity of local businesses and neighborhood centers, and health and wellness. I'm going to take a step back for a second before I move on to the next activity. If you remember, back in 2020, the planning department did a robust pre-planning process to get ready for this, and they found that a number of the 2002 master plan themes remained relevant when they tested that out with the public. However, some interest had evolved from the residents, so we heard back then equity, housing, transportation, mobility, safety, environmental justice and health, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. And so we had an activity as part of this round to kind of hear what people is on minds now. It's 3 years later. Are these still relevant? Are people still interested in these? And what we found is that generally most themes for the pre-planning phase are still important to people. We heard about equity, housing, mobility, environmental justice and health, and climate change. Safety, we heard about safety. It wasn't quite as strong, but we heard it kind of more integrated across themes. And we also know that economic health, culture, and vibrancy were also important to people out of our first round here. So our big ideas for this, as part of this first round, in sort of order of how many people talked about them and were on people's minds, are here: transportation, housing, equity, vibrancy, and sustainability and environment. There are other themes or other things that are important to people, but these all got sort of more than 60% of the comments, and so we decided to lift those sort of up today. So 90% of participants identified transportation and or mobility as a theme or mentioned specific actions that related to transportation mobility. The bullets underneath here, sub-bullets, are just a sample of ideas. They are not the ideas we heard the most. They're not any kind of priority order. They're just a sampling to give you a sense of what we're hearing from people. So we heard about increased operation hours for the bus system, more ways to pay for fares, a lot about bike lanes, protected bike lanes, improving bus stops. People talked about better train access to Chicago and Detroit, and car-free spaces throughout the city. Housing was another big topic. 88% of participants identified this as a theme or mentioned specific actions. A lot of ideas around not only affordable housing, but different types of housing at different densities, even some non-traditional kind of housing types like group living, ADUs. A lot of mentions about support and service for the homeless population, stronger protection for renters, encouraging cleanup days in neighborhoods, better utilizing some of those underused properties, parking lots, former industrial areas, and education for folks on home ownership, repairs, and warranties. And I will say, Kristen mentioned this, we did meet with the steering committee late yesterday, and so last evening I looked through there. They all, in groups, did some analysis on some of these, or all of these. They worked in groups to give us some input in their analysis on this input. And so last night I went through those and tried to put some of the flavor in here. So some of these bullets are coming from the steering committee review as well. Equity, 73% of participants identified that as being important to them. We heard things such as increased funding for schools in all zip codes, more recognition of cultural diversity, cultural events, eliminating food deserts, expanding social services. Again, we hear about support for the homeless population, more transparency, and communication, better communication or access to information for all. Vibrancy, that's a term that we kind of used. 68% of people mentioned things that we felt had to do with vibrancy. So things about revitalizing the riverfront, designing more spaces. People really, across multiple of the activities, we heard about spaces to hang out for people to gather that are free, outside green spaces, constructing more community centers, creating public art that reflects cultures and neighborhoods, and more organized activities for youth and teens. And sustainability in the environment, 63% of participants identified this as a theme. We heard things such as increasing solar presence, community solar, creating opportunities for urban agriculture, a lot of comments about increasing the tree canopy and the use of native plants, organizing community gardens, again, to help with food desert areas, increasing accessibility to composting, and better network of EV charging. So those big ideas, again, they were working in groups to provide individual ideas, and then they worked in the workshops in groups to kind of theme those or look for ideas that coalesced. And so this is a reflection of that big idea exercise. The next exercise we asked them to do was about future housing. And so we had a big map on the wall. We asked people to, and this was also mimicked online in a digital map. People could drop a dot online. But we asked them to put a sticker dot or drop a dot on where they thought in the city we could use more housing. And then there was a comment card where they could provide why they thought that area needed more housing or what type of housing they thought might be appropriate there. So the map here might be hard to see for you, but there are some clusters you can see there, but you also, what I noticed most about it is there's a lot of dots all the way across the city. So I think people see opportunity in a lot of different places. We found that no matter there were some site-specific comments, but generally a lot of the comments rolled up into some of these example comments to the left, but more missing middle housing, reusing and redeveloping into more medium and high-density housing, multifamily housing, duplexes, some stacked housing, housing near downtown jobs, of course, the affordable housing piece, idea of upgrading older buildings to meet healthy living standards, and again, this reuse or redevelopment of abandoned or underutilized buildings and industrial. And we felt like there was quite a bit of comments about people understanding the need to build up, not out, which is good and not always the case in communities. So. Area-specific plans. You've seen this map, I believe. I think this came before the commission maybe a couple months ago, but we have identified 3 areas that are going to be focused on for area-specific plans for this as part of this process. The Southtown neighborhoods, the Butterworth area, and Creston. And so we had the map up for folks to take a look at, and then if they happen to reside in one of the areas or have some thoughts about that area, we were asking them to share anything that we as the planning team could learn about these areas, or if they had specific ideas or things they thought should happen in these areas. So for the Southtown neighborhood, emerging themes were around improving infrastructure from a lot of different ways. So roads, bike lanes, crossings, lights, streetscape, more tree canopy and green space. That's definitely kind of a theme throughout all of those 3 areas. Improving housing stock and strategies to protect current residents so there's not displacement. Encouraging more diverse businesses and small businesses and access to healthy food. In the Butterworth area, the emerging themes there were around opportunity for redevelopment and reinvesting in older businesses, improving facades and landscaping. Again, interest in green spaces. How can they retain and create more green spaces where people can gather? They identified some parking and transportation challenges. How can we improve alternative transportation options? A need for more variety in housing, making it easier to build housing in this area, cleaning up the industrial sites, safety, lighting, and walkability. And finally, Creston, one of the ideas we heard there, some of the input was around the area has a lot of potential or opportunity for small business incubation and development. Again, housing options and housing needs, additional active transportation, bike lanes, and again, open space, gathering spaces were really important, and connectivity to downtown, better maybe connecting that neighborhood into the downtown, and just some input around balancing between residential and the business or mixed use. The 5th activity was called Share Your Understanding, and there are some terms that are used a lot that we thought would be helpful to get a localized sort of definition for. What do people in Grand Rapids think when you ask about equity or safety or culture or vibrancy? We think these could be terms that start to underpin some of the planning work. So we asked people, what is their understanding or definitions of this? And so some of the bullets here reflect that. If it's in quotes, it's something somebody actually is exact quote. Others are just us sort of paraphrasing. But for folks here, what we heard was equity is about removing barriers and creating equal access and lifting up minority voices. The ability of I think the second bullet says it really well, the ability of the community to support a wide variety of socioeconomic individuals with different backgrounds, cultures, and desires that allows for them to thrive. Affordable and fair housing. We heard stuff about transportation and the access to tools and resources no matter where you live in the community. And safety, feeling protected no matter where you live or the color of your skin. Inclusion and collaboration were really important here. Cleanliness, this idea of slowing down, more walkable life aspect, and respect for all. Culture, celebrating differences and different cultures, sharing our histories. A lot of people talked about, the arts and festivals and food and that sort of aspect of culture. This idea of flavor or vibe or unique traits of an area. And finally, vibrancy, People talked about, standing out, being attractive or lively. They quoted a lot of summer festivals and different things to do, getting to know the neighbors, walkable communities, places to spend time in. We're hearing, I think, across the input, again, city is for people, not cars, where everyone feels safe and is out and about, welcoming and thriving. And the last activity was a storytelling activity, and we asked folks to tell us a story about their favorite experience in Grand Rapids. And from this, we're hoping to tease out some values. I won't read all these; they're kind of long. You're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint, I believe, after this meeting. But what I took away from these was that a lot of the stories were around people and the places in the community where they go with their friends or family, whether it be a festival or an experience that they had together out in the community. And so these are a couple examples. I mentioned the Easttown Street Fair and a few other places, but it's really about people coming together with people they know and love and spend time with out in the community. The Community Connectors program is also a part of our engagement strategy. We had 17 community connectors, they're our boots on the ground, our ambassadors out in the community. They conducted the meeting in a boxes. They conducted 27 meeting in a boxes and conducted 45 interviews. We also had 13 neighborhood organizations participating as well. And so while we had open call meetings asking people to come, to us and participate, some did, but we know not everybody can come out and engage that way. So this was a tactic to reach more people, and I think it was successful, and we're going to continue to work with the community connectors throughout the process. They conducted some one-on-one interviews, and I think we're seeing a lot of the same points here, so I'm not going to hit every one of these, but, walkability, transportation, the homelessness, cleanliness and maintenance of areas, cultural preservation. So we're seeing a lot of the same ideas through these. We also did, back in December, kind of as part of this first round, we met with stakeholders around certain topics. So these were, arts and culture, the natural environment, development, housing, workforce development, transportation, so on. And we had different questions for them. And so the input's a little bit different, but I think it reinforces a lot of what we're hearing from the public as well. So all of this is going into the hopper, to help us as we start to really focus down on what we need to continue to develop as part of this planning process. I want to just quickly at the end here preview the round 2 engagement. Is coming up quickly. So we do have a workshop planned on May 18th from 5 to 8:30 at GRPS University. This is going to be an opportunity for the public to come and give some feedback on some of the pieces and parts of the plan that we're developing now based on the input from the first round. So vision, values, and sort of goals, community goals. So that will be a chance for people to see what we've done with their input and check us and validate, say, yeah, that makes sense, or you missed this. So we will be testing that back out with the public. But we're going to dive into 3 of the topic areas that were really important in the pre-planning phase, and we've heard again in our work, land use planning for climate mitigation adaptation, land use planning for environmental justice, health, and equity, and this idea of sort of coupling land use, housing, and mobility together, which I know are meaty subjects in and of themselves, but trying to integrate that into an idea of the 15-minute community and doing some work around that with folks. So people get a chance to dive into some of these topics. We have our partners at CNT helping us with these, and so we're going to have an opening sort of session where everyone's together, and then it's almost like a mini conference where people can go into breakout rooms and they can choose to engage with one topic, or they can rotate through and engage in all 3 topics. We will be providing dinner as well, and hoping this gives a chance to dig in a little bit more into what we heard, some of our technical analysis, bringing that in, and doing some more deeper work in some of these really important areas. We are also going to have a presence at the Neighborhood Summit on May 20th. So those same sessions that we're doing on the 18th, we're going to have like a tract in the Neighborhood Summit. So that will also reach a lot of folks that plug in through the neighborhood associations. I think that's it. That was a lot. So if you have any questions, let me know, or for Layla or Kristen.
All right, thanks. Commissioners, any questions for Sarah?
Well, first a comment. I went to one of the sessions and I really liked the way you engaged people. And what was particularly fun was the, for lack, I don't even know if you called it this, trivia about
Yeah.
some of the demographics and things. Can you answer the question about how much we've increased in housing and lowered in business or industrial? Those are kind of the three large uses here.
Yeah, so there's the housing assessment that just came out with some projected needs. I know that for industrial, if I'm remembering back right, the percentage is around 6%,
Okay.
which is really pretty low, and you need to, because a lot of your industrial has been revitalized into housing or different uses, which is great to free up some of the riverfront area, but you got to find a place that you still want some of that in your community
Yeah.
as part of your economic base. So we have an economist on our team. He's looking at that with my partner back at our office, Logan, who's doing the land use work. So that's one of the things we're keeping an eye on, is where can we still make sure that the community has industrial land for future development. The business piece, I don't think I have off the top of my head. I think we have something in there about some of the top businesses. But again, Kevin Hively with Nindigret Partners, he's our economist. Back last month, he was here in town meeting with developers, meeting with businesses. I've not had a deep dive with him yet, but he's working on some stuff. So we'll have more on that as we move forward. We're fundamentally in the process. We've had a lot of focus on getting through this first round of engagement and preparing and kind of providing the foundation. We're going to be moving in with a steering committee through the summer and early fall into more of these topics and kind of dealing with the data and what does it mean and what do we need to do about it.
Yeah, thank you. The housing part of this afternoon's presentations will be interesting, but my thought is that we've gained some population, but not a huge amount because we're pretty much built out.
Yeah, you're built out. Yeah, you're landlocked.
But
yeah.
that possibly family size or unit occupancy size has been going down.
Yes, that's true. That's a nationwide trend of household size going down. So that's also the need for different types of housing, right? Not everybody wants to live in a detached single-family house, especially if they're living alone or with roommates or something like that. Their needs are different. So yes, that's happening here, and it's sort of a nationwide trend as well. Mm-hmm.
How do you, or what ideas do you have to engage with the younger generation? And then if you don't get that engagement, you try different things and you still don't get it. How do you move forward with, there's still a demographic in the area. How do you move forward with, even though they didn't engage with you, still trying to get ideas that can, improve their lives and everything? Yeah.
So, our goal is always representative engagement. So while we didn't hit some of the exact percentages, we did hear from folks in those age groups. So we've got a little bit to go on, and we're hoping we can build upon that. We actually strategized with the steering committee last night about how we can reach out to the youth in the 18 to 24. And so some of those ideas are working more closely with the community colleges. What we found generally when you're trying to, the 18 to 24 year olds, like an elusive age group, they're hard to engage no matter where you are. But there's some strategies about working with the community colleges. We have to go to them more, right? So what is the best mechanism once we have a contact there? Is it going into, some of those colleges have like an ambassadors group. Can we go in and meet with them? Can we go into a class? We did that, Layla did that for this first round, and that was really helpful. So we've got our foot in the door. We just have to kind of build upon that. We also talked about folks that necessarily aren't in college, but are still in that age group. So church groups, young adult church groups, even going into identifying some of the manufacturing or business that we could go in, even putting a survey in their break room or trying to go in and engage them while they're, get some time when they're like sort of on the clock, so to speak, because we know it's hard to get that, get people sometimes outside of their work hours. And then for the younger, the under 18, Layla got to meet with three classes at the Innovation High School. So we've got sort of a connection there. We're going to continue to build that, maybe expand it to some other high schools. But we found that the best way to engage that youth is to to go to them. So work with the principals to, everyone takes an English class, so can we have 10 minutes for them to fill out a survey? Can we pop into a class and run some workshop activities? It's a great thing to do maybe as part of a civics course. So some of it's just finding what's the best way in, and so we're continuing to work that. We're also going to be relying on our steering committee, right? They are representative of the community. They've got access and networks, so we're going to rely on them to help us fill some of those gaps now that we've identified them moving forward. So we're going to keep trying, and I'm confident we'll be able to continue to build that up as we go through the process. We got 4 rounds of engagement, so we're hoping to catch them up here. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, hopefully that was helpful to all of you. And I did distribute the RAC cards for the second round of engagement. There are several out there on the desk by the parking validation system. So I'd encourage you, if you can, to take some and distribute them within your networks as well to help us spread the word about these for the next round of participation. So thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate your help here.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate your time. All right, our next presentation will be the updated Housing Needs and Opportunities Report. Looks like Ryan's going to present.
All right, so we have Ryan Kilpatrick from Housing Next here to provide you with an update on our housing needs assessment. I mentioned during our lunch portion, we did have a housing needs assessment that was done back in 2020. Perhaps no surprise, our numbers, our needs didn't get better. Our needs got worse, the numbers got worse. So this data, I think, is really important because it can help inform, in part, some decisions that you make here or recommendations that you make here at the Planning Commission, and also really valuable information as we move through our master planning process. One of the major criticisms we received when I was going through the Housing Next process back in 2018 was the lack of data and the desire to have data-informed decisions. And so this is the data that we can use both to help educate our community about what the actual needs are, and really breaking that data down into price points and numbers, renter versus ownership. And so I'm very grateful to have this tool that we can use as we move through some important policy discussions. So, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. I know that was a great presentation from Planning Next, and I don't want to overwhelm you with PowerPoint, so I'll move through my data slides relatively quickly. I think this body probably knows really well the importance of housing. Normally, Brooke, my counterpart, Brooke Osterman with Housing Next, and I spend a lot of time across Kent County as well as Ottawa County talking about the importance of housing. I think there is no lesson that I can teach you about how important it is that every individual and every household has a safe, affordable, high-quality place to live in our community. One of the things I want to talk about throughout the presentation today is the importance of housing and how it's impacting different households in different ways. We have an entire segment of the population that is aging, that is 75 years and older, and living in older housing stock. Their housing stock is also aging, and as we know, aging in place is more difficult in older housing stock, especially when you don't have the financial resources to keep up with it. Single-family homes are particularly hard to keep up with, especially when they're 75, 100 years old or older. And so finding ways for older adults to either age in place or transition into alternative versions of housing that are more supportive of their needs, but also within their community. We don't normally advocate that we move folks out of their social community and into entirely different neighborhoods that are isolated from their social networks. So finding new ways to provide additional senior housing in our neighborhoods. I do always want to highlight that our current housing market is plagued by shortage. There's a lot of scarcity of housing out there, and it drives prices up. That doesn't hurt everyone equally. Folks who have been homeowners for 15 or 20 years or longer are building a lot of equity in their homes right now. And so we have to acknowledge that there is an entire group of individuals, myself included, who are homeowners and who benefit from scarcity. Whether that's good for the rest of the community or not, we have to acknowledge that folks will try to protect that benefit as a result of the increased value of their homes. But simultaneously, we have a lot of young people and a lot of first-time homebuyers who are trying to break into the housing market and are boxed out because of that scarcity. Because they haven't yet been able to earn a six-figure income, they find it difficult to afford housing in our community. They find it difficult to become homeowners and difficult to start to build equity in their community. And so finding ways to balance the interests of all of these different kinds of households is one of our priorities, is thinking through how do we support existing homeowners as well as future homeowners? How do we support our lowest income renters as well as new market rate renters? All of those households are important. So you may have seen some of these high-level numbers in the press recently. Kent County as a whole needs almost 35,000 additional housing units in just the next 5 years. And about 40% of that housing need is expected to be derived just from the city of Grand Rapids. A big reason for that is Grand Rapids is an amenity-rich, walkable urban environment, which a majority of the housing market is looking for today. Suddenly, we've had this generational shift where both baby boomers and millennials, our two largest generations in the history of the United States, are both looking for walkable, amenity-rich neighborhoods at the exact same time. And yet it tends to be baby boomers have more access to wealth and more access to equity, and so they can outcompete in the marketplace. And so what we're finding is all of this demand for amenity-rich, walkable urban neighborhoods, and yet Grand Rapids has the 5% of land area in all of Kent County that is actually walkable and amenity-rich. And when I say that, there's just actually a handful of neighborhoods that we could consider to be highly amenitized and walkable. So again, scarcity is the theme here. What we're looking at right now is vacancy rates. I thought there was a little highlight here. Vacancy rates among market rate rental, among subsidized rental, market rate for sale, and the home prices. And you can see our market rate rental vacancy rates are below 3%, both in Kent County and in Grand Rapids. A healthy vacancy rate is closer to 6 to 8%. Most developers, when they underwrite for a bank, are going to underwrite a minimum 6 to 7% vacancy rate just to manage potential losses from available units. We're not even close to that, even among our market rate housing right now. Much more scary to me is our affordable housing vacancy rate is literally zero. There was one available unit at the time that this survey was conducted among 9,152 subsidized units in all of Kent County. And so when we think about households who are earning $25,000, $30,000 a year and need access to affordable subsidized housing, there are no units available right now. The same is also true for market rate for sale. We've been talking about this now for years. Collectively as a community, houses are still going for $20,000 or $30,000 over asking price. People are still waiving inspections. There are still multiple bids per home. This is, again, a function of scarcity. And in the for sale market, there's a lot of housing out there, but there's very little housing that is actually available for sale in the marketplace. And part of the reason for that is if you're a homeowner today and you're looking at interest rates and the costs to buy something else in the market, it makes a lot of financial sense to stay right where you are, right? And so for all of us who might otherwise say, hey, we're going to take the next step up in the housing market, we're feeling like, oh gosh, I don't want to take on a 7% mortgage rate when my current rate is 3.5%. But for all of us who are choosing not to take that next step, the next generation of home buyers is finding it harder and harder to break into the marketplace. So this slide really quickly shows you the changes from our 2020 housing needs assessment to the 2023 housing needs assessment. The blue is the projection from 2020 to 2025, and the orange goes out to 2027. You can see where we've had significant increases in housing demand and housing needs. Almost every price point except our for rent in the 80 to 120% marker. We're just barely keeping pace. That happens to be a majority of the housing stock that is getting built in both the city of Grand Rapids and Kent County. Everything else we're falling far short on. I've mentioned the importance of the for sale market. In just the last 6 years, the cost of the average home price on the market has almost doubled. So we're almost 100% the sale price that we were at in 2016. In Kent County, it's about 75% greater. So once again, this is a beautiful small home available for sale in the city of Grand Rapids, or at least it was about 30 days ago. That same home last sold for $117,000 in 2016. Really quickly, this data, it feels overwhelming in this format, but it tells an interesting story. Top left corner shows you the number of starter homes that have been built over the last couple of decades. And actually, I want to precede this slide by saying one of the really important things for you all to know that Brooke and I are working on is a regional approach to our housing needs. This is not a City of Grand Rapids problem. Frankly, it's not a Kent County problem, and it's not a Michigan problem. This is a problem across North America for the most part. We have underbuilt for the last 25 years, and we have made it difficult to build the kinds of housing that are most needed, that match the market segments that are out there. And so what you're looking at here is national data, but it's pretty well reflected in Michigan and in West Michigan. So you can see our new starter home sales and creation of new starter homes have fallen precipitously over the last 10 or 15 years. And what that leads to then is a majority of first-time home buyers are no longer buying a $150,000 new starter home, like my parents did when they first built their house in the early 1980s. They bought a brand new starter home that, I don't know, it was Eastbrook or somebody who built it. Most new first-time home buyers are now buying a home that is 50 years old or older because those are the more affordable homes in our community. But those are also the homes that have historically been our naturally occurring affordable housing. As housing gets more than 30 or 50 years old and it needs more deferred maintenance, those homes tend to become more affordable over time. But because of scarcity and because of this factor that we have so many people who want to live in these urban walkable neighborhoods, we're actually seeing more competition among both first-time home buyers and future second or third-time home buyers in those same neighborhoods. Bottom left corner, what you're seeing is the starter home share of all new sales. It used to be close to 40% of all new home sales were starter homes, were homes priced in that $100,000 to $250,000 price point. Now, to find a house priced under $250,000 in Kent County, the last I looked, there were 6. Total in Kent County, 6 homes priced under $250,000. It changes by the day, right? Every now and then there's a new listing that comes up in that price point, but most of our housing is now priced at or above $250,000. And so again, you can see the first-time owner share of value versus the value of the property. Most first-time homeowners really need product below $250,000, and the significant chunk really need product well below $200,000, and we're losing that stock due to competition. So, but what is happening is we're having new, young, affluent families as well as older, more affluent families who are moving into neighborhoods. And I would guess that 20 years ago when the last version of the master plan was updated or rewritten, that would have been considered a great thing, right? We wanted to see more home owner occupancy in our neighborhoods. We wanted to see more home ownership. We wanted to see more young people becoming homeowners in our neighborhoods. Well, all of those things have come to fruition, but what we haven't done is maintained an adequate stock of available and affordable supply to continue to support those lower and moderate income households who wanted to stay in their neighborhoods. What we have now is a competition between new first-time home buyers who want to move into a neighborhood and the older renters, or sometimes younger renters, who are lower income and can't afford to be homeowners. And because we don't have enough housing supply for both, it's typically the more affluent home buyers who are winning that market battle. And to further emphasize this point, I wanted to give you some specific data from the 49507 zip code. We're seeing some pretty dramatic changes there. And I think what we have heard sometimes in the community is that part of the problem in the community is developers, is the fact that we have this new development that is driving up prices. And while we do have new development in many of our neighborhoods, there is actually less new multifamily or even 2 and 3 and 4 family apartments in our neighborhoods, especially in the 49507, than there was 10 years ago. So what we're seeing is an increase in single family home occupancy and a decrease in duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and multifamily. And you can see that borne out in the numbers. There's a pretty big shift in the number of owner-occupied housing structures in the 49507. And then when we start to look at the change in incomes in the 49507, what we start to see is a drop in the number of low-income households in 49507, and across all of those income segments above $70,000 a year, pretty significant gains in the number of higher income households in that zip code. And again, what we're seeing is competition in the marketplace and those more affluent households winning out when we have a scarcity of supply. So I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, Most of the time, homeowners spend a smaller share of their income on housing than do renters. That's typically a function of how the mortgage market works. It's really hard to get a mortgage that costs you 40 or 50% of your household income. Most of us are capped out at 28 or 30% of our overall household income. But we have a significant gap in the home ownership rate between white households and households of color in Kent County. And so if we're making it harder to be homeowners in the community, we're making it exponentially harder to be a homeowner of color in our community. So this slide gives you a sense of how we kind of think about the breakdown of housing. There's affordable housing, which tends to be categorized as housing that is affordable to households earning 60% of the median income. In Kent County, that tends to be households earning at or below $46,000 a year. Then there's attainable housing, which is households earning 60 to 120% of household income. Those households used to be very much middle class. Those were the households who really needed and wanted the $150,000 to $250,000 home, and still do. But because that product isn't available anymore, that is the dominant renter class in West Michigan and across the United States right now. Households earning between 60 and 120% AMI. These are teachers, firefighters, police officers, first-year tech workers, sometimes first-year engineers. A huge chunk of our workforce falls in this category, and you can see how many more units we need in that category. And then you can also see there is significant demand for just true market rate housing, but for the most part that is able to be built now. Making it easier is great, but thinking about how do we simultaneously ensure there's an adequate amount of affordable and attainable housing is imperative. So I'm almost done. I do want to give you some positive things in this conversation. There's really good work happening. Most of it is being spearheaded by Brooke Osterman with Housing Next. Kent County has made a $17.5 million pledge to an affordable housing revolving loan fund. We expect that to leverage at least $2.3 of private sector capital on top of every dollar that's invested from the county. They're also investing in zoning reform across Kent County. So Brooke and I are out giving the same presentation to every community that will listen to us. All of our communities need to add more housing of a greater variety and greater variety of price points. The city of Grand Rapids has recently allocated $5 million in ARPA funds to an affordable housing loan or a affordable housing trust fund. We expect an allocation to be made in May, so those dollars will go out the door quickly. And you all need to be credited for many of the zoning amendments that you have passed in the last several months. Allowing 4 stories by right in TBA, allowing residential on the ground floor have been really critical to getting more housing supply moving forward. There are definitely still opportunities to do more, but I think it's really critical that the work that you're doing is known and appreciated across the region, because I think you're at the vanguard. I think that you are allowing the types of housing more easily and more constructively than any other community in West Michigan. There are also expanded economic development tools and incentives to make housing more affordable. Brooke and I have been working with a number of partners across the state to ensure that we're getting this legislation passed, and hopefully a few more bills yet to come this year in 2023. We've got some goals. Most importantly, we think that we've got to increase housing production countywide threefold. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were seeing roughly 55 to 60,000 new housing unit starts per year. Right now, we're closer to about 11,000 new housing starts per year. So even if we increase production threefold, we'll still be well below our production in the late 1990s. We also have to be thinking about how do we preserve existing affordable housing. We still have housing that rents for between $700 and $1,100 a month. It's getting thinner and thinner in terms of the amount of stock out there, but to the extent we can preserve it in the interim, that's really important. And we've got to think about direct interim supports for households who are most at risk. We can't solve this with supply alone. We also have to be thinking about how do we stabilize households who are at risk. Lastly, it's really important that we just talk about the math for a second. As much as I would love it if city, county, federal, state governments all said, all right, we're going to subsidize all of the housing that we need with just public dollars, I think that would be fantastic. When we do the math on what that subsidy would cost, right now in the marketplace, we need a minimum of $100,000 to $120,000 per subsidy for homeowners who are earning at or below 80% AMI in order for them to afford housing, and a minimum subsidy of $60,000 per renter earning at or below 80% of AMI. If we multiply that times the 50,000 households or just the 35,000 households in Kent County, we get a really big number, right? Just in Kent County, we'd need $1.8 billion over just the next 5 years. And if we were to simultaneously say, let's subsidize households who are at risk until that housing becomes available, it's another $1.5 billion over the next 5 years. So we're talking more than $3 billion of subsidy just in Kent County if we were to say we're going to try to subsidize our way out of the problem. We definitely need subsidies, and we need controls in place to stabilize households who are at risk, and we need a lot more housing supply. So thank you for letting me provide this presentation. I'm happy to stick around for questions, and Brooke is also here to answer questions about the great work that's happening around the rest of the county.
Thanks for that, Ryan. Question on just your last slide there with the amount needed to subsidize these homeownership and rental needs. This is based off of the 35,000 over the next 5 years in Kent County?
Yes, Kent County. So if you were to take just the green and the blue on this pie chart,
Okay.
if each of those units needed an average subsidy as shown.
I see. So it's not trying to make all of those units affordable.
Correct.
It is just what's, okay, got it. Seemed like got it. Other questions for Ryan?
Ryan, you talk about zoning reform, and I think that there's a progress that we could definitely make, but zoning isn't always the enemy, right? There's a lot of other things that have to happen. And if we make zoning more permissive to make it easier to build some of that missing middle type housing, what are the metrics we should be watching to see what other areas of our community we might be impacting? You know, there's obviously huge concern about displacement and gentrification, and the natural concern, I think, of community members is if you add more new housing, that you're going to increase displacement, you're going to increase gentrification. And so are there metrics that we as a city should be monitoring to see if we're kind of tipping or imbalancing other scales of a healthy community? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, so the great thing is we now have this baseline benchmark, right? I wish we had the same level of baseline data from 2020 on a census tract level where we could say, how many households do we have at each income price point, race, gender, and ethnicity? Going forward, we have all of the data that we need. And so for us to really be thinking about what is the number of households at each income segment, and how are we ensuring that we're continuing to provide housing for those households while we add additional housing stock, whether that additional housing stock is low-income housing tax credit subsidized, or if it's market rate, or if it's something in between, really thinking about what can we do to preserve available housing for lower-income households while we add more supply is really important. I think one of the elements I want to highlight, we've been working to advocate in favor of an amendment to the Brownfield tax increment finance legislation that would allow for new tax increment to be captured in order to stabilize households who are at risk of being displaced by new development. So the opportunity is to say, and you all have seen this a number of times, a developer comes into a neighborhood, buys 4 rental houses and said, I'm going to tear down these 4 rental homes and build a 50-unit apartment complex. From 30,000 feet, I would say that's great. 50 homes is better than 4. But for the 4 families that lived in those homes, it's a nightmare, right? And so we've got to figure out how do we solve for those 4 families. This new legislation would provide direct funding to allow for relocation assistance and at least a year of rent assistance to make sure that we can find new, safe, stable, high-quality housing for that family. Preferably, we create options that are in that new development in the same neighborhood that they were in before. So really thinking about that stabilization component is going to be important. The other thing I think is important to think about is our ratio of public to private open space. We haven't really talked a lot about this in the past, but historically, I think many of us are used to a majority of our green space being private, these little fenced-in yards that some of us use and some of us don't. I think we can be more efficient in the way that we structure green space and think about in this master planning process, how do we provide for more public green space if we're going to build on more of what used to be private green space. So if we've got, as an example, if you've got a higher traffic commercial corridor with single-family homes where you might want to upzone and allow for smaller scale, missing middle or multifamily housing. Simultaneously, how do we think about how we're adding public green space into that so that we continue to have a really high quality of life and high access to those outdoor amenities?
Is the goal of your study or recommendations or how much money we need is to have 100% home ownership?
No, I don't think we will ever get to 100% home ownership, right? So there are lots of people who just say, like, I don't want the responsibility, or I might only have a job here for a year and then I'm moving on to another city. So at any given point, at least 40% of the population probably wants to or needs to rent for a short or long period of time. But we do want to try to make sure that anybody who wants to become a homeowner has the opportunity to become a homeowner. And I think part of that understanding needs to come with a recognition that not everybody needs a single family house on its own lot, right? But they can still be a homeowner, whether it's a condo or a townhouse or a partnership in a cooperative, right? All of those things are viable options to build equity and have home ownership. And so creating more opportunities for people to be homeowners without necessarily having to have the yard to take care of and the roof to replace and the basement to clean out all the time, creating those additional options is important.
Thank you.
So in our lunch meeting, we discussed potential next steps. It sounds like, we've made some changes with our ordinance over the past couple of years that we think have been helpful, and we know that there are a lot of other things that need to be done. Kristen, can you just remind us what next steps might be in addition to the community master plan and how Housing Next might be a part of that?
Yep. So at the end of, this presentation was given to the Committee of the Whole on Tuesday. At the end of the presentation, there was several commissioners that voiced support for us to begin a conversation about what can we do now and not wait for the conclusion of the master plan or the implementation of the master plan, which obviously will be several more years out. And so I'm anticipating a follow-up conversation with City Commission and what that looks like. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm guessing it will be some low-hanging fruit. Ryan mentioned, smaller density, like fourplexes, for example, on higher volume streets. Perhaps we look at accessory dwelling units and streamlining that process further. So there might be some things we could do now and try to identify what those buckets might be: accessory dwelling units, small scale, higher density developments. Ryan is kind of like a partner, almost like a staff liaison. So he and I would work closely alongside our staff and Brooke as well to begin brainstorming what that could look like. From there, I would expect it would come back to, it will have to come back to Planning Commission, because the form that this would take is, if we do something now, is that we would be looking at zoning text amendments to modify our residential housing policies, and largely in Article 5. And so that would be a text amendment that we would draft with the Planning Commission, bring it before a public hearing with your recommendation back to City Commission. So those are some of the next steps as I understand it, based on our conversation earlier this week.
I do think some interim changes would be helpful. This update is only 2 years after the original study, and we can see how much the need has already grown, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So I'm in favor of moving forward with brainstorming additional text amendments and other solutions as soon as possible. I do think it would be useful for us to have a joint meeting with the City Commission to try to get on the same page about what those ideas might be and what the appetite for taking on some of those amendments could be. I think it's going to be, that will allow us to streamline the discussion so that there's not a lot of back and forth, and we'll be able to get on the same page and hopefully come up with some bigger ideas that we can really move the needle on this.
I can forward that request, assuming that that's supported by the rest of the commission. Yep. Okay. I'll put in that request. Thank you.
Ryan, I wonder, in the, from the Planning Commission's perspective and from, the sort of the perspective of Housing Next and the scope of that work, right? Zoning and housing starts and those types of things are a few of the levers we can pull. From a global perspective, there are a lot more levers, right, to start talking about the wealth gaps in our communities and how they've grown. I bet they would almost mirror your statistics around housing challenges, all that kind of stuff. What do you see, and that's not the purview of our work here, but what do you see else going on in the community that would help to alleviate some of these things? Because I think planning and zoning and housing is really important, but I should say planning and zoning is really important to housing, but it's only a few of the things in that bucket. What are the other things you're seeing in that other areas of that you see out in our community or in our world globally that you're seeing?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Brooke and I were actually just part of a conversation with Housing Kent talking about kind of that global framework. I think the stagnation of middle-class wages is definitely an issue, and that becomes more acute as we underproduce housing, right? It's a reinforcing negative feedback loop. When wages aren't rising enough to produce enough affordable housing, and then we're not producing enough housing, those two things reinforce one another. Other elements here, I think right now we're facing headwinds in the financial market, right? With interest rates close to 7%, that makes it more difficult to finance new development. It also makes it more difficult for people to get a mortgage. Access to high quality education, especially in Michigan, can be difficult depending on your census tract, right? Depending on the district that you live in and your neighborhood school. We have very closely tied access to education to your place of residence. And even if you can get school of choice, finding transportation to get to that other more high opportunity school can be difficult. And so part of what we really want to think about on a countywide and regional basis is how do we make sure that we've got high opportunity in every neighborhood, so that we've got a variety of housing types in every neighborhood and in every school district, so that we're not constantly saying, all right, our lowest income residents are stuck with some of the lower performing school districts across the county, but we've got available and affordable housing in every one of those school districts. There's a number of issues that all play into this. There's a line that I learned in college that was, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that we're getting. And that's what's happening right now, right? We have unintentionally designed a system that is giving us these results. And changing our land use policies is one element of that system. But there are several other state, national, and global issues that are going to continue to impact this. And so this is going to be a long-fought battle that happens not only here locally, but at the federal level and beyond.
There's a new book out called America is Poverty that I've just started reading. It's been reviewed quite favorably, but it also talks about, and you talk about systems, that our tax code system, which allows homeowners to subtract interest, thereby, if that money weren't allowed to be a deduction, it would fund billions of dollars in housing. So it's doable. It's just there's a lot of systems, and you can't look at just one area. But it's a systematic thing. I appreciate your remark about systems.
Ryan, I appreciate the data-centric approach. That's very helpful. But perception is a lot of people's reality. So I'm just wondering, Giff, in your experience, if you could name one particular perception that you find frustratingly difficult to change, because we as ambassadors can then maybe help with that any way we can.
I think one of the perceptions that we bump up against a lot is that new development raises prices. And statistically speaking, that's untrue. We've got actually a lot of new data from the last 6 or 7 years across metropolitan areas. The Upjohn Institute in Kalamazoo recently published a study in 2021 that showed new development actually stabilizes and in some cases reduces prices, even when it's market rate new development. But we have to take that in context, right? So when new development occurs in a neighborhood that has otherwise been disinvested and otherwise has very few amenities, and suddenly amenities are injected into a neighborhood where there weren't amenities before, that neighborhood suddenly has a new reason for other people to say, oh, this neighborhood is cool now, right? We want to move in. But when a neighborhood is already to the point where we've got young affluent homeowners who want to move in and we've got other rental apartments, now what we're trying to do is keep up with demand, right? And so what we really have to recognize is if there are 100 individuals who are competing for 4 available apartment units in a neighborhood, what we need to do is produce 100 more apartments in order to satisfy that demand. Otherwise, that competition will continue to raise prices in the neighborhood. That's counter to, I think, what a lot of people feel, right? What feels visceral in your neighborhood when a new development shows up. You have a thing to blame all of the other issues on. But what we can say from the data is that more development actually helps stabilize and sometimes reduce prices over time. The one caveat that I would add to that is as often as possible, we need to be thinking about neighborhoods as mixed income neighborhoods and not just say, like, let's always build as much market rate as possible. We've got to constantly be thinking about how do we partner with our nonprofits and even our for-profit LIHTC developers to say, all right, we're getting 100, 150 new market rate units. Who's coming on next with the affordable housing units that are going to be right behind the market rate units so that we continue to have mixed income neighborhoods over time. And that's a delicate balance because you can't mandate that. It's really got to be a proactive approach where the city and the community as a whole are thinking about this issue together to say we don't ever want a neighborhood to gentrify, right? We want to continue to provide a variety of housing choices and a variety of housing price points.
If I might just add to this story, I remember moving to Grand Rapids 40 years ago, and people were leaving the city. So while we have a challenge, the good news is people are wanting to move into the city. And I appreciate all of the data you've given us and ideas to look at how we build upon that to make sure housing is available to everyone. Because we have a real asset in this town, I think. And compared to cities across the United States, this supposedly, from what I've read, is one of the more affordable places to live.
Yep.
All right. Well, Ryan, I appreciate the work that you've done. Thank you, Brooke, as well. And appreciate your time today. We look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone who sat through the 2 presentations this afternoon. We'll get started with our public hearings now. Just a quick rundown on how we'll handle each case. The staff will present the case to us. We'll have an opportunity to ask them questions before inviting the applicant up to share any additional details with us. After that, we'll open the public hearing, and if you're here from the public, you can come forward, state your name, and share your brief thoughts on that particular case. Once the public hearing is complete, then we'll have the applicant back up if there are things they'd like to address. Then we'll have our discussion and make a decision and then move on to our next case. Before we get started with 526 Maynard, commissioners, any conflict of interest today? I may have one. I'll just, for consistency's sake, bring up 710 Wealthy Street Southeast. This is for a distillery, off-premise distillery tasting room on Wealthy. About 1.5 years ago, I recused myself or was conflicted on a similar case just right next door pretty much to this because my business was opening one a couple blocks away. So I think to be consistent probably makes sense for me to not be a part of that case.
So we'd be looking for a motion on that.
Anyone?
I move that we approve your request for a conflict of interest approval. I'm not sure how to word this.
Just say I have a conflict of interest.
You have a conflict of interest. I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, any discussion on that? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, then before that case, I'll turn things over to Paul. Any other conflicts for today? All right, let's get started with 526 Maynard Ave Northwest.
This is a project that you have seen previously. There was a major amendment to allow the development that you see here. I've forgotten how many buildings that is, 7 maybe. It was originally, it had frontage on both Lake Michigan Drive and on Maynard. It was originally, I think, 3059 Lake Michigan Drive. It's subsequently been divided and now just has frontage on Maynard. And the applicant has been back for some minor amendments and for final site plan review. Today, the project is before you for a major amendment request to add a commercial daycare into the development. This is because of the nature of the use, that it wasn't originally contemplated. This will require a recommendation from the Planning Commission to the City Commission and final approval from the City Commission. So the development is proposed to have 240 dwelling units, and in lieu of 10 of the dwelling units, the applicant is proposing, where in this area that's shown in red, proposing to devote that area into a child care center of about 7,800 square feet. This is the building that's closest to Maynard, and it's also closest to the northern property line where there are residential dwelling units. There are no site changes that are being proposed to the development to facilitate this, other than the addition of a playground. The entrance drives on both the north and the south are proposed to remain as approved. The landscape buffer that was approved between the entrance drive and the parking lot and the residential homes to the north will remain as approved by the Planning Commission. The landscaping that you see on this plan it's a landscape plan, and this landscaping will be planted upon completion of the improvements on the site, including the buildings and the parking lot, and then the site will be landscaped. I'm just pointing that out because the site does not look like this today. A fenced outdoor play area is proposed west of the area devoted to the child care center. It will be fenced. It is adjacent to the proposed detention basin, which is also fenced. The detention basin is required to be fenced by stormwater code, and so that will be fenced. And then adjacent to that, there'll be a sidewalk in between, will be the outdoor play area. Pickup and drop off. Actually, it's probably easier to see here. Pickup and drop-off is, actually, I'll go back here. Pickup and drop-off is proposed in these spaces that are shown in yellow. So parents dropping off their children will park in those spaces, take their children in, and then come back. What we show what's shown in red is, these red arrows, is the anticipated circulation associated with the daycare. I don't believe folks will be prohibited from utilizing the entrance on the north, but I think for traffic circulation, folks will be encouraged to use this southerly entrance. And I'll defer to the applicants to correct me if I've gotten that wrong. The area in the orange is to be dedicated, to be used by the teachers that will be working in the center. The center is anticipated to be licensed for up to 120 children, ages 6 months to 12 years old. There'll be 8 classrooms, and there'll be 20 to 25 employees working at the center, with 16 employees working at any one time. And those 16 employees would be parking in that area identified in orange. The 16 parking spaces for that staff parking, even taking out the staff parking and the pickup and drop off, the parking requirement will still be met for the residential uses. There was an amendment to the development that was actually requested by the state. The state had actually asked their state funding being utilized for this development, and MSHDA had asked for additional parking, and so there was plenty of parking. There's plenty of excess parking here, and so the daycare parking can be accommodated. So again, the Child Care Center is proposed in the northerly portion of this building closest to Maynard. Here, this floor plan is showing you the detail of that. As I mentioned before, 10 dwelling units are being eliminated, and 8 childcare classrooms substituted. A new entry canopy is proposed, going to the sidewalk that goes to the parking lot. There is one main access to the Child Care Center. As you can see, there are doors to every classroom, and that is a building code requirement. It's, for emergency egress. The main access is through, the main entrance door, but every classroom will have emergency access, egress. Those on the west side, which is what I'm pointing to right now, those egress doors do go out to the playground, and there is a glass overhead door proposed on west elevation. Right there we are. A glass overhead door is proposed on one of the classrooms. This is the elevation that's facing the parking lot, and this area of the bubble is where the daycare is proposed. You can see the entrance that's highlighted here. The original window openings that were anticipated for dwelling units, some of them would be converted to doors, those emergency egress doors that I mentioned. Relative to, I should say, other than that, there are really no elevation changes. Very few changes are being proposed to facilitate this. Relative to traffic, Our mobile GR department did request an addendum to the previously prepared traffic impact analysis to compare the trips that were anticipated for the residential development and then the development with the proposed childcare center. The analysis does estimate that there will be an increase in traffic at the AM and PM peak hour trips, which is when we'd anticipate parents to be dropping and off and picking up their children. The analysis does assume a 25% internal capture of residents in the complex using the facility, but even with that, there is an anticipated increase in traffic. Those details are included in your packet. That it's a 2-page memo, and it shows that there is some traffic increase. The traffic engineer who prepared the analysis does indicate, however, that they might anticipate additional trip reductions by pass-by trips from, residents living nearby that might use the daycare and other elements such as that. But in sum, the analysis concluded that there would be some additional trips anticipated, but that they could be accommodated within the adjacent roadway network. Our traffic engineer at Mobile GR has reviewed this and concurs with the findings. So if you add an additional use, you will see some additional traffic. It will be limited based on the use here, but the traffic, the roadway can accommodate it. Mobile GR did also review the pickup and drop-off and finds that to be sufficient. I just wanted to mention signage. No additional signage specific to this is being requested. The applicant anticipates that a door sign will be used on the door to identify the daycare. The applicant is also allowed 2 monument signs, and they could incorporate the daycare identification into the existing signs that are allowed. Relative to neighborhood outreach, the applicant provided some additional information yesterday based on their neighborhood meeting that was held on Monday. I'll let them talk about it, and we do have those slides available if you want to reference them. So in sum, we're looking at the addition of a daycare of up to 120 children in lieu of 10 dwelling units in a development that was originally approved for 240 dwelling units. I'd also like to mention that this morning I received 2 letters of opposition to this request, and those letters are included in your packet. Did you have any questions for me, or shall I turn it over to the applicant?
Thanks, Elizabeth. One question I have, one of the letters mentions that they would have a living room view of the daycare parking lot. Was the parking lot ever proposed to be on the Maynard side of the building, or was it always considered internal to the complex?
It was always internal to the complex, but I mean, there is this parking that I'm pointing to right now.
Sure.
I know that didn't you folks show a different site plan during that meeting? I don't know that would have made any difference. It wouldn't have made any difference, right? Yeah, I'm not really sure what that refers to. I believe that person does live across the street.
Okay. Other questions for Elizabeth about this? All right, thanks. I'll invite the applicant up if there are other details you'd like to share with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I wanted to first thank you for having us and hearing us out. We think this proposal is innovative and directly responding to the concurrent need for both affordable housing, which this project is, but also for accessible childcare, which is also in dire need throughout the community. So thank you for hearing out this application. We did have a neighborhood meeting earlier this week on Monday. I'm not sure I'm doing that. I would like to apologize actually at this juncture. The site plan, as Elizabeth mentioned, that we shared at the Monday meeting was an older version of the site plan. The primary difference was the northern drive egress was a previous version that showed it winding slightly south and not aligning with the neighbor across the street. So that caused some confusion in that meeting, and we responded to him at that time, and what's on your screen today is the correct one. To respond to the earlier comment, just to put a finer point on it, there never was an external or Maynard-facing parking lot. It's always been internal, and so the comment could just be related to what they anticipate to be happening along the northern boundary. But as Elizabeth mentioned, that is unchanged from the current approval in terms of that landscape buffer. Those are really my comments for the afternoon, unless anybody had any questions for us.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the applicant? All right, seeing none, I'll have you take a seat. I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today about 526 Maynard Ave Northwest, I invite you to come forward, state your name, and share your brief thoughts with us. I should have mentioned earlier, we do ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, just in the interest of time.
I'm Charles Cook. I live at 555 Maynard Avenue Northwest. I'm the gentleman he was talking about from last night. This is not the map that we've seen for the past 4 years. So my neighbors and I all feel that we've been given misinformation about this project from the start. The map earlier, as he talked about, showed the driveway coming down here. Right now, it's coming straight across into my driveway. And the biggest thing with this whole process that they're going through there, I think that the original traffic study, I think it was done in 2020, and unless that was done in January or February, there's no way that traffic study can be accurate. Because March of that year was when the governor shut down the state, and everything was closed. Most of my neighbors were staying home. So that traffic study would basically be invalid. And now with this coming in, you're talking about, there's 498 parking spots. Not to mention 50 to 100 more vehicles with this daycare center planned. That's almost like turning my street into Lake Michigan Drive. And my neighbors and I are highly concerned about this. 2 years ago, somebody put a traffic light, I don't know if it was a city or if it was Wyoming, somebody put a traffic light down at the end of our street on Lake Michigan Drive. We've had multiple traffic accidents there. People are flying through that street light, through the red light constantly. The last one I saw there was 4 weeks ago. There was a 3 or 4 pile up at that intersection, and one of the cars almost hit my neighbor's house on the corner. It stopped 3 or 4 feet from his front living room. So I don't understand where all this information is coming from as far as how this is going to affect traffic on our street, because I think it's highly inaccurate. And now putting in a daycare center on top of that, and that's going to throw in another, 50, 100 cars, people running in and out. My neighbors and I are concerned about this entire issue. We're also concerned about the value of our homes. My wife and I have lived there for 5.5 years. Some of my neighbors have been there for 30, 40 years. We've put money into our homes. We've tried to increase what Mr. Ryan talked about, or a value and equity. And now with something like this going across the street from us, it gravely concerns us that we're going to lose the money that we're putting into our homes. And we just don't feel it's right, especially we don't feel that the studies have been accurate. We've been given misinformation the entire past 4 years about this whole issue. Even the communication has been poor.
All right, thanks, Mr. Cook. Your time's up. Anyone else on this case today?
Hello, my name is Brandon Bilski. I'm the grant specialist at Degage Ministry, and while I'd certainly applaud the attempts to have much more affordable housing in the city, I would like to just give you a sneak peek into what I'm dealing with every day. We have over 100 women in shelter right now, and that number has gone up 60% since the pandemic, and we've seen a lot of need, and in part of Ryan's comments, he talked about the many workers who are the core of renters, who are many of which at risk, and the economic situation is quite dire just internationally when it comes to housing. So we need bold solutions. And I have my cards here. I am in my past a policy debate coach, which means I love policy and I love creating the argumentative solutions, right? And as a city, we need to come together and stand up to what is the core of the systems that are by some intentional, right? Not all of us. Certainly it's hodgepodge, but we need to really come together and create a big, bold solution to the housing crisis. The fact that there are 0 beds available for 0 to even 50 or 60% AMI is a tragedy that we must face, and it's one that I do not hear in Housing Next proposal because they're trying to account for just the market in and of itself. But I'm trying to account for every soul, every human soul that needs love and light and support and deserves dignity and respect. And our civic duty here in this hall is to help the most vulnerable among us. So instead of just looking at the quotes for the $1 billion it would take for giving everybody a 100K house, let's look at real tangible solutions. We need tiny home villages. We need transitional housing that can support people's mental health needs as they're dealing with the trauma of the violence, the economic violence that this causes every day. And every day I go to work and I have to tell people how we're doing. I go in and I say, yes, I'm trying to get the money for this and that, and we're keeping the lights on, but there is struggle every day. And so I encourage you to come to Degage, come to some of the shelters and walk with us in this struggle. Not for the homeless, but with us. And I tell everyone to come in, but as leaders here on this body, could you spend a night there? And how many nights a month could you spend there? How much time do we spend for the people who need it most, who can't even come here to speak? You have the developer's perspective, but I can help you. I am your servant, and I am proud to serve. I believe in servant leadership, and that means we walk with and not for. Thank you.
Anyone else on 526 Maynard Northwest this afternoon? Are you part of the development team?
I am, but I'm the child care operator. I just wanted to give a quick statistic.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Let's double check that we're done with the public hearing, and then you can speak to that if you want. Anyone else from the public on this case? All right, then I'll close the public hearing. Come on up if you want to share that statistic.
Thank you. My name is Tyler Hunty. I'm the child care operating partner with Magnus Capital and Home Flats. We reached out to get some statistics about the need for child care in the specific zip code related to Maynard, and the children in that zip code compared to the available capacity, they can currently house need for 20 to 25%. So it's in dire need in that area. And do you guys have any questions for me about the childcare operation specifically?
Not really an operational question, but I'm mildly surprised to hear that there's no signage really being requested. You're comfortable with the development entry signs? I guess signage specific to the to the child care facility.
Yeah, I believe with what Ms. Zeller mentioned, there's 2 monument signs approved, and we're going to utilize the one at the entrance, right, that we want the parents to use to try and direct that traffic, along with communicating that with them, because we know, there is a lot of traffic, and we want to work with that, along with the above the canopy of the entryway.
Okay, so canopy.
Yeah, it's
wall
going to be
sign
right on
type.
that canopy, yeah. There's only one allowed entrance for parents, entrance and exit.
Understood. I heard Elizabeth say something different, I think, like a graphic on the door, so I just want to make sure we're clear.
That was what was either in the application or conveyed to me. I don't think we talked about above the canopy, but we. In the original PRD, or in the PRD amendment to allow this development, we assigned signage associated with residential zone districts. So they could have anything for that. For the size of this property, they could have 2 monument signs. They can share, both of the uses could have portions of that. So they can divide those 2 signs up any way they want. They're allowed a window sign on the door. And that was my understanding. And we'll be happy to work with the child care provider on anything else.
Any other questions or comments for the applicant at this time? Anything else you wanted to add? No?
I'm all good.
I guess I'm just curious if this is like the final or the final. I mean, is this, you've been here a lot, we've looked at this many times, this is my neighborhood too, so I guess I'm just curious and addressing the gentleman's questions off of Maynard here. 1, do we have the right information? 2, is it accurate reporting? And 3, are you going to be back in another 2 months with a different idea, or are we going forward with this one?
So what you have in front of you is correct. It is representing a change from the existing approved PRD. This is a notable change, of course. We think it's an appropriate change, of course, that's why we're here. And it is the bulk of our changes we anticipate for the PRD. Remaining changes that may happen over the course of the development that is to be completed would relate to landscape design and things of that nature, only to upgrade them from current municipal standards, but nothing beyond that. That's our anticipation.
And is there anything that we can do, either through landscaping or any other means that would help alleviate this driveway to driveway situation, which we can probably appreciate would be
We would be open to any discussion
problematic.
around landscape features specifically that may help alleviate any concerns. We'd be open to that discussion. And we're happy to work with staff in that.
Great, thank you.
In that capacity.
Certainly, we can require additional landscaping. We will have to be careful of having clear vision, corner requirements. I'm trying to recall, Elizabeth, you might recall too, that I believe that driveway did have to move because of engineering standards and such, that was one of the reasons why it wasn't able to come further south. But certainly if the Planning Commission feels that landscaping beyond the minimum requirements of the ordinance is necessary, whether that's along the north lot line to screen the addition of a commercial use, that's certainly something that can be considered. Additional landscaping on what would be the south side of that drive. We'll just have to be very careful about that clear vision corner requirement.
I'm curious, Kristen or Elizabeth, on the traffic study comments. I mean, I think it's it doesn't really address it in the study, but to me, it's a valid concern that the traffic study is done like in October 2020 is likely, no?
So the traffic study was done during that time frame. However, the data that was used was pre-COVID data. So the actual numbers that were utilized to create the traffic report were numbers that were used prior to the pandemic.
And Elizabeth, I'm just confirming, what we're doing is approving not the footprint so much as just the usage of the first floor of one of the buildings from apartments to daycare.
I'll answer for Elizabeth, yes. The building footprint itself is not changing. It's the use that was previously approved for residential now becoming daycare. You are approving the footprint of the use, meaning, I don't have it in front of me, but the X thousand square feet associated with the daycare is, and if that should increase in the future and desire to take up more floor plate, that would require an amendment through the Planning Commission. So I usually say, planned redevelopment districts are a blessing and a curse. They can be a blessing because they can be flexible. We can come to an agreement about what's appropriate, but they are also kind of a curse because they lock everybody in to the specific plan, but that gives predictability, that gives certainty, that gives comfort. But they're not as nimble as some of the underlying zone district requirements. And so when there are changes, or if there are desired changes, those do have a fairly robust process from a technical perspective coming back through the Planning Commission. What we define as major changes, such as a change in residential density, such as a change from residential use to commercial, those go also back to the City Commission.
Any other questions for the applicant before we have a discussion?
I have a quick question about, because this would be turned into commercial space, where, are we going to have to relocate dumpster enclosure into this spot? It's hard for me, it might be on here, I just can't see it.
I wouldn't anticipate that. Vishal, you might want to correct me, but right on the north end of what was showing in red, the north end of the building, if you go directly east, you can see a dumpster that is screened, that was a couple of parking stalls.
Yep, I got it.
That seems like a reasonable location for maintenance staff to take trash from the daycare to that dumpster. Any relocation of that dumpster, certainly further west, would not be supported by staff. North of the building would not be supported. So there might be some movement to the south that's an option, but I think its current location makes sense and seems to meet the needs of the operator. It's in close enough proximity.
Thank you for clarifying. And then I do have one other question as far as parking goes, because we're adding employees to this space. Does the parking, is that still adequate number of parking spots? Yes, okay, thank you.
Yes, a parking analysis was done in light of the new uses, and it was determined that there's still adequate parking.
Sorry if
for
I
that.
missed that.
No,
Thank you.
that's okay.
All right, if there's no other questions for the applicant, I'll have you take a seat, and commissioners, we can discuss the request for this use.
I think the addition of this use makes us even more viable community, and the study that the whole area needs this will enhance the neighborhood. I am glad that it was clarified that the data used for the traffic study was using data prior to COVID regulations. But I'm supportive of this use. It doesn't really disrupt the whole layout, it seems to me, but adds an amenity that'll be not only good for that that complex, but for the neighborhood in total.
I think it also might be worth noting that there is the bus rapid transit line on Lake Michigan Drive. And as part of the requirements of the city with this development, it does require the installation of a sidewalk connection along the entire frontage. So this will add a connection and improve walkability from even residential areas further north to the BRT, and also provide that direct connection from this development to the BRT line.
This one is harder for various reasons. You know, the use is already approved, so these apartments are going here. And just as a side note, affordable housing, income-based housing, definitely, to me at least, implies that people who live there have an income. So I'm not as concerned with, I know one of the comments was, a bunch of college students living here and playing around for whatever reason with the kids that are going to daycare. I don't see that happening. But having a space where, right, educators, factory workers, folks like that, who are not, upper class, upper middle class, can still be able to afford to live in the city, I think is a really good thing. But before this, and even in contemplation of this, one of the biggest problems was the traffic. And so I do take a moment to just yield to some of the comments. We don't want this to become Lake Michigan Drive. And so having this place here, while it is a huge benefit to the community, obviously it would be a huge benefit to the people who are living there. It's needed, absolutely. Child and daycare centers are definitely needed in our city. It will no doubt add to the traffic, which is already an existing issue here. It's already an existing problem. And there's no way around that, unless somehow you start chartering buses of kids, which wouldn't happen. That's not realistic. So I don't know. I'm interested to hear what other commissioners have to say, but I'm kind of on the fence with this. I definitely understand the use. I get it. It's great. But to the neighborhood in general, that will have to deal with this increased traffic, that is a huge concern to me.
It does seem, Commissioner, that the developers are trying to move or contain most of the traffic for the daycare center to the southern part of the road, which might limit then the northbound kind of traffic and help alleviate some of your concerns.
From a traffic perspective with daycare and even with the school, this is something I'm personally drop off and pick up on a daily basis with my kids in their school. And we're talking about 100 children at most, often families. So and I understand, I appreciate that we are talking about extra traffic here, but for the most part, based on the times that this is in operation, you're really going to see those heaviest traffic flows twice a day. And it will, this isn't like a different type of commercial space where someone's going, they've got traffic coming in and out all day long. This will be limited to certain times of the day with the higher volume of traffic. So I just wanted to point that out and something to consider when we're thinking about the traffic.
Yeah, I think the traffic study, I have a hard time challenging that since I'm not a traffic expert. But looking at the increase of potentially 28 daily trips with this adjustment, that doesn't concern me too much, especially considering the traffic flow that they're trying to encourage with drop off and pick up. I do continue to think that this use as a residential development is the right use, and I think it's something our city needs. One of the letters that we received said that I cannot believe that what this city needs is more apartments, and I think we've learned today in every meeting that that's not the case, that we do need more places for people to live. And I do think that this is an amenity that people also need. I think there is a shortage of this in our city and on the west side in particular, and I think this nicely incorporates into this residential development. Hopefully it's an amenity that folks that live here can utilize. So I am supportive.
It may be helpful as well to look back at some of the past planning work that the city's done, specifically the Vital Streets Plan. Maynard is identified as a link residential, and when we look at what that means, it talks about streets that serve a larger network function, providing connectivity between neighborhoods and local destinations. It does go on to say that they're commonly the location of local community facilities, such as parks or recreational facilities, schools, or houses of worship. Then when we also go back to just the residential zone districts, which this was prior, and surrounded by, or at least to the, to the west and to the north, community childcare facilities are uses that are allowed as special land use. And one of your standards for special land use talks about the location of the use itself. And traditionally, the Planning Commission has looked at concentrating or allowing, I should say, these types of non-residential uses, so services to support residential neighborhoods, on streets that can support higher volume, i.e. link residential. So there is some past planning work that would suggest allowing these types of non-residential uses in locations such as this do make sense. Now, it's certainly a significant difference from what was there or what is there currently, meaning it was a greenfield, not developed. So certainly we can see the traffic data does show that there will be an increase in traffic, but it's not an increase beyond what the network can support. So it's a change to the character, it's a change to the people that live there, but it's not a change beyond what the system can support. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I just thought I'd tie some past planning work for you.
Yeah, I think that is helpful. I think, those link residential streets are always, some of the challenging spaces that are on the edge of, this boundary between residential and a higher density use. But I think, at the risk of just repeating comments, I think I'm generally supportive.
There's no more discussion. I'll go ahead and make a motion.
All right, please do.
Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Planning Commission recommends approval of the request of, is it Magnets Capital Partners, Vishal Arora, for a major amendment to the approved development plan at 526 Maynard Avenue Northwest to incorporate a commercial child care center for the following reasons. The proposed building and site will meet all standards for site design because all elements of the site design are harmoniously and efficiently organized in relation to the size and type of lot, character of the neighborhood and adjoining property. Safe, convenient, and well-defined vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation within and to and from the site is provided. The mix of uses, density of development, and design of the proposed PRD are consistent with the master plan and the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance because the proposed use is consistent with the objectives of the Great Neighborhoods chapter within the master plan to protect the character and quality of established residential neighborhoods and promote active and vibrant mixed-use environments in appropriate locations. The proposed PRD will ensure efficient development on the property and will result in a logical and orderly development pattern in the neighborhood because the adequate connections to existing walkways and public sidewalks are proposed, and the proposed buildings will be placed in the previously approved location. The proposed development will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the existing or planned character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed use will not be any closer to adjacent residential development than originally approved. Potentially adverse effects arising from the proposed development on the neighborhood and adjacent properties will be minimized because the building has been designed with adequate setbacks from adjacent residential uses, and the driveway and parking lot are adequately buffered from the adjacent residential uses. The proposed development will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future adjacent uses or to the public welfare by any reason of excessive traffic, glare, or noise, because the traffic is not anticipated to be significant given the nature of the development, and the surface parking lot will be visually screened from the residential neighbors. Adequate public or private infrastructure and services already exist or will be provided at no additional public cost and will safeguard the health, safety, and general welfare of the public because the subject property is located in close proximity to public transit and major streets and is currently served with public utilities. The proposed development will not be detrimental to the financial stability and economic welfare of the city because the scale and design of the proposed development will not place an excessive burden on services currently furnished by the city. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to the project. Standard conditions set A approvals on the screen, and I'll read them out loud, that the application and plan submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans, except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or as amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. The land use, development services, LUDS permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. And that the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. Number 2, that all conditions associated with the previous approvals for this project shall remain in effect except as modified by the resolution. And that this approval shall take effect as required by the City Commission approval in accordance with Section 5.12.12.g of the zoning ordinance.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and support. Any final discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Our next case is 16 Griggs Street Southwest. Elizabeth will walk us through this case as well.
The next item on the agenda is a request for 16 Griggs Street Southwest. Alaman Auto Repair is requesting approval to expand their existing vehicle repair business. You may recall that not too long ago, this same applicant was before you requesting approval to rezone the subject property from TN-LDR to TN-TBA. That was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, and on November 1st, 2022, the City Commission adopted an ordinance approving that rezoning. So the subject property in green is now TN-TBA, and the applicant has come before you today to request that the existing home on the property be demolished and improvements be be permitted for vehicular storage associated with their adjacent repair business. And vehicle repair requires special land use approval in the TNTBA zone district. The applicant has been before us a couple of times in the last couple years. I've brought it to the Planning Commission at least 3 times since 2016. And they did put an addition on their little repair shop, so that and they also demolished an adjacent home. So their property is now about 12,000 square feet. They wish to add the adjacent formerly residential property of about 5,700 square feet, to enlarge their business. Altogether, it will be about 18,000 square feet. The home will be demolished and all site improvements removed. The parking lot, let's see here, the parking lot will be set back about 20 feet from Grigg Street, and that's, even though it could be closer to the street, no closer than the existing building, in our discussions with the applicant, we recommended that it be no closer to the street than the adjacent residential building. So that's why it's laid out as shown here. As far as, I do want to point out that this last space, I think there are 11 parking spaces proposed. This last space will be challenging to exit, and typically for a parking lot that the general public would be using, we would not allow that, given that this is a parking lot to be used only for, only by the vehicle repair shop. We sort of felt that it was better to add as many parking spaces as we could. I know that they do have a dire need for additional parking. So if they can get the car in there, I think, and get it out, that should work for them. They do intend on using the existing shared curb cut. It might be better, you might be able to see it on this slide. There is a curb cut already. The house had a shared curb cut with the vehicle repair, and that curb cut will be maintained. So they won't need to move that. They will need to provide stormwater detention or water quality. They do have an engineer working on that, and there'll be a leaching basin. There is a light pole that's shown in this buffer area that will need to be moved out, but that can be done at LUD's permitting. Green space is adequate, and tree canopy will be reviewed at LUD's permitting. Relative to parking lot landscaping and buffering, there will need to be parking lot landscape screening between the parking lot and the street, which can be addressed at permitting. Additionally, a landscape buffer is required between the parking lot and the 2 adjacent residential uses. The applicant proposes a 6-foot-high privacy fence, in which case, with the Planning Commission's approval, the width of the buffer can be reduced. As proposed here, the buffer widths are within that reduction ratio. So if you're amenable, this buffer width could be constructed. the relative to minimum parking requirements, this expands the parking, so parking for employees will be adequate. There are a couple of vehicle service and repair requirements that are in Article 9, their use requirements. We are carrying over some of those namely their operational plan. They did that previously, and we still want that to be in force and, consistent with the original approval and the use requirements. They will not be able to conduct any repair activities outdoors. The applicant did have a public meeting, and I'll defer to the applicant to talk about that. I have not received any letters of support or opposition. So in sum, we're looking at the expansion of an existing vehicle repair business on a property that was recently rezoned to TNTBA, and this will support the adjacent repair business. Do you have any questions for me?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Commissioners, any questions for Elizabeth at this time?
I have a question. Is this going to be combining the two lots, or are they separately?
Well, I'm not sure if I remembered to put that condition of approval in the recommended conditions, but they should combine them. This is an expansion of the repair facility, and they should be combined.
That leads to my second question. Do they have the appropriate green space on the adjacent land?
Yeah, I mean, they've expanded twice already. Every time they've had to go through that calculation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm not sure if I missed this, but who owns the house? Do they own the house that they want to
The applicant has owned this home for many years.
Gotcha.
All right, there's no other questions. I'll invite the applicant up if there are other details you'd like to share.
Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Tamika Aliman, and I'm just wanted to say thank you for listening to our proposal today. My sister-in-law was here with me, but she had to leave, and I don't have any additional details for you besides what Ms. Elizabeth has already presented. Oh, yeah. So we did have a neighborhood meeting. We did pass out flyers. I think it was like a 300 square radius, maybe. We did do that. We didn't have anybody attend the meeting, but my father-in-law has lived there many years, so he knows many of the neighbors, so no one was opposing it. So that's what we did.
Any questions for the applicant? All right, thank you. I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today about this case at 16 Griggs Street Southwest, I invite you to come forward and share your thoughts with us. Brandon, before you start, I'll just point out that comments should be directed about this case in particular.
Okay.
And if you'd like to speak about something in general, we have a public comment portion of the meeting at the end of the meeting.
Okay, I can make it about this. So, my name is Brandon Bilski. I applaud this particular proposal. It's definitely speaks to entrepreneurship and the ability for small independent businesses to thrive, and especially in our economy that is very cutthroat. We actually have one of the largest per capita amounts of small businesses both in Michigan, and it's pretty big. It would probably be competitive nationally, and unfortunately not everyone does get that same capacity to have a small business or even a job. And the number one way to get access to that is through housing. So the more we can provide housing at a 0 to 30% AMI, that would be beautiful, because we truly do need to give everyone that access to the equality of opportunity, right? The ability to rise and to grow is like, we have so much money. And I want to emphasize.
Brandon, anything in particular about this expansion of their use?
I definitely support it, and these are the reasons why.
Well, I think what you're trying to get into is probably more suited for the public comment portion at the end of the meeting.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. Anyone else about this case? All right, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, any additional questions for the applicant on this case or discussion?
I love that this business keeps expanding. This is a case that I'm not sad to see up here more than one time. So congratulations. That really speaks to a number of your successes, I'm sure. I don't see any problem with this. I was, kind of going back and forth in my head about the house coming down, and yet we need houses. Like, we were kind of talking about that back channel over here a little bit, but I think that this is appropriate in this space. I feel like this is a growing business that we should care about supporting, and that your success is obviously breeding success, and I really appreciate that overall. So thank you.
I would echo that. Generally, would not be in favor of tearing down a house in order to put up parking. However, in this case, I think, it's great to see. This is my neighborhood, more or less, and it is. It's great to see businesses continuing to thrive in this area. It's kind of a tough area for businesses sometimes, and so I applaud you and your father-in-law for continuing to invest in this community. I know that just from the application, the family lives in the neighborhood, and so we love to see it. So congratulations.
I do have one small question for the applicant. Like, how long, just considering like the adjacent homes, or they're not there on the screen, sorry, but how long is like a car usually kept in there, in the lot there?
Oh, okay. So we do move cars pretty fast. I want to say it depends on the service. It can depend on the service. Like if it's an engine, it can be there possibly 2 days, depending on when parts are delivered. But usually most of our service are either same day or next day pickup.
Okay. And so there's already, and maybe the line is just different or whatever the case may be, but like there's cars inside the lines there already. Am I right to assume that those are like cars to be repaired by the business already?
You mean like on this photo here?
Yeah, it's like.
Oh, okay. I see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So sometimes our technicians do park the cars depending on what service needs to be done. And then sometimes if a car is purchased like by my father-in-law, it may sit there for repair. So that's why it may look like it's just over parked.
Got it.
Yeah.
The reason why I asked that, because it's essentially you're already using the space for the business.
Oh, you mean because the residents? I'm sorry, I was talking about the business side. For that one, I believe they have parked some cars back there, but I believe those may be cars that were either towed or, again, maybe my father-in-law made a purchase for a vehicle. But usually when the cars are back there, they're towed or they have some type of damage.
Got it.
In that area.
I think the aerial photo is a bit indicative of a business that has been experiencing success and growth, and perhaps this is visually showing us that they do need room to expand, because they were beginning to encroach on spaces that otherwise were not intended to be used for the storage of vehicles for repair.
Yeah, that was my whole point. Yeah, I'm in support of it. I think this is a really good thing. And while I'm in support of it, I just plug that I'm very glad that I drove a Honda, because we just never have these kind of problems. And so if you're looking for a new car,
Are you in that sales
I'm not. I'm not a sales business at all. I got a new car and everything, but I'm just saying. All right, I'm done.
Any other comments, discussion, questions? All right, would someone be willing to make a motion?
Yeah, I can make a motion. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the request of Almain Auto Repair Incorporated, Catalino Almain, to utilize 16 Griggs Street Southwest for vehicle storage associated with an existing auto repair facility at 1801 South Division Avenue for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will foster a strong economy by encouraging the expansion of an existing local business. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08.e because the expansion has been designed to meet all standards and requirements with modifications permitted by the zoning ordinance. Number 3A, the proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed use will be consistent with the current character of the neighborhood. Adequate on-site parking is available. 3B, the proposed use will not have potentially adverse effects on the neighborhood because effective screening, fencing, landscaping, and buffers will be provided. Number 3C, the proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare because excessive noise, glare, or visual clutter is not anticipated. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of pedestrian-oriented environment because landscape screening will be planted in front of the parking area, reestablishing the street wall. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or the economic welfare of the city because the use will not result in nuisances that require code enforcement actions. The active use will encourage other investment in the area. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions set A approvals as shown on the screen.
You'll need to read a couple of them that were stricken from our first motion.
5 and 8? 3, 5, and 7.
3, 5, and 7. Okay. That number 3, that this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future signs shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. Number 5, that any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. And then number 7, that this approval shall take effect 16 calendar days after the date of the Planning Commission's decision. And that can move forward. Number 2, that the operations plan associated with PC-SLU-2016-0078 shall remain in effect. Number 3, that all activities shall be performed within the building and all vehicle parts, tires, etc. Shall be stored within the building. Number 4, that any trash containers kept outside of the building shall be enclosed in a permanent enclosure in accordance with the requirements of Section 5.2.14. Number 5, that the site shall meet green site elements, green space and tree canopy, and parking lot landscape requirements, screening, buffering, and interior landscaping, consistent with the standards of Article 6 and Article 11. Number 6, that with the installation of 6-foot-high privacy fence, the landscape buffer along the west property line shall be at least 7 feet in width, and the buffer along the south property line shall be at least 6 feet in width. Number 7, that all lots associated with the use shall be combined.
Support.
All right, we have motion and support. Any final discussion?
Do we have to add the condition of the lot?
Yep, that was the last one, that all lots
I'm
associated
sorry.
with the use shall be combined.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay?
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you very much. Before the next case, I'll step out and have Paul take over.
Our next case is 710 Wealthy.
This next case at 710 Wealthy Street, the applicant is requesting approval to establish a tasting room and cocktail lounge associated with an off-site distilled spirits production facility. They're also asking for the sale of distilled spirits for off-site consumption and a waiver of the required parking spaces. The future land use map designates this property as traditional business area. It is also within the Cherry Hill Historic District and is subject to the Historical District approvals and guidelines. The surrounding area to the east, north, and west is TBA. To the south is low-density residential. To the north is a city-owned parking lot. There's a yoga studio and the former Royals restaurant that is currently vacant. To the west is former Elk Brewing, which is currently vacant, a mixed-use building with second-floor apartments. To the east is mixed-use, retail on the ground floor and second-floor apartments. And to the south is a city-owned parking lot and low-density residential homes. The site is approximately 5,000 square feet in area. It has been vacant for a number of years with the windows boarded up. It had, I think it had a mural of fish on the boards covering the windows for, I don't know, maybe 20 years, for as long as I can remember. So it's, you know, good time for this building to be improved. So the lot is about 5,000 square feet. It has this one-story commercial building on it. The building is about 2,000 square feet. To the rear of the property, alongside the alley, there's an accessory structure, approximately 772 square feet in area. The Historic Preservation Commission has approved some changes to the property. They have approved a new storefront windows to be installed along with a new door system on the main building. The accessory structure was approved to include new overhead doors, a new man door and windows, and on this slide here, you can see there's a trash enclosure on the west side of the accessory structure that was also approved by the Historic Preservation Commission. There is a building permit that's been issued for work on the main structure for the storefront and a white box interior renovation. Regarding the use, the tasting room will be about 1,600 square feet. There is space for about 64 guests on the inside, 64 guests on the outside. The inside will have a cocktail bar there, and then seating for about 64 people. And around the staircase leading to the basement, there will be built-in shelves that will be the location for the merchandise and the packaged alcohol sales. Outside, there are picnic tables providing seats for about 64 people. The accessory structure is expected to be used for additional outdoor seating or a mobile bar. They have proposed to install a fence at the west side of the property at Wealthy Street and at the alley to fully enclose the space. And this, the west side of the outside area is expected to be used for outdoor games like bocce ball. There is some live acoustic music proposed for both indoor and outdoor, limited to 2 or 3 days a week from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. The operating hours requested for indoor is Monday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to midnight, Sunday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. The outdoor hours would be Monday to Saturday, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., and on Sunday from noon to 10 p.m. There won't be any food served on a regular basis, but the operations plan includes that people are encouraged to purchase food from elsewhere and bring it in while they have their tasting, so that's encouraged. There will sometimes be private events or special parties or special events that will involve a catered, outside caterer coming in to serve food. In regards to parking, there is no parking on the site. The Planning Commission does, you may waive the required parking based on meeting waiver requirements. One of those is the availability of on-street and district parking. There is that 26-space lot across the street on Wealthy Street that's city-owned, and the other city-owned lot is another 26 spaces in the alleyway behind the property. There is also on-street parking on Wealthy Street available. There is additionally the Rapid Route 5 services Wealthy Street. There is a bus stop across the street going west at Wealthy and Henry, additional stops a few blocks away at Eastern. Relative to neighborhood outreach, the applicant has indicated that they've reached out to neighborhood businesses. I can defer to the applicant to share more details about that. And no letters of support or concern have been received to this date. Some key considerations would be the addition of the proposed alcohol use to neighboring uses, the intensity and hours of the outdoor use, again, relative to the neighboring uses, and whether the parking should be waived. In sum, we ask the Planning Commission to consider the approval of the tasting room and cocktail lounge with sale of packaged alcohol for off-site consumption, and this waiver for parking for Mammoth Distilling. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Laura. Any questions for Laura?
I have one question, Laura. Was there discussion about the outdoor seating going till 11 and not 10 p.m. per the ordinance weeknights? There was not. Okay, we did not discuss that. Okay, so maybe I'll ask that question again.
Okay, thank you. We'll invite the applicant up to add any details you would like to share.
Hi, thank you for the time. I know it's probably been a longer day than you
Could you stand in front of the microphone, please, and announce your name for the record? Thank you.
Stuart Hickman, I apologize. I don't have any specific thing to share to the patio hours. Chad Munger, our owner, was the one that has filled out all of the applications. I would not plan on the patio being open till 11 p.m. I would keep the hours pretty consistent with my other tasting rooms, which would be, traditionally closed by dark. So whatever we filled out, that is no plan of mine. Whatever the ordinance is, patio probably would not be even considered to be sat 12 months out of the year anyway. We did canvass the neighborhood. We gave out flyers for blocks upon blocks around the actual business. I also met with all the business owners throughout the whole corridor. We had a meet and greet at the Winchester for any concerns, which really just turned out to be many business owners showing up thanking us for trying to come into the neighborhood as apparently that space has been vacant and an eyesore for a long time. Paul Lee has kind of shouldered a lot of the business and employment, in particular since COVID in the area. He's been very supportive of us. And really the meet and greet with business owners was just, encouraging us to try to revitalize the space because there's currently a number of kind of dead spaces in the immediate area.
Could you clarify that any live music would be not amplified?
Yeah, the live music would, if we're inside,
outdoors.
But outside, no. Yeah.
Thank you.
And to be honest, even inside, the vibe is more, just so somebody can enjoy themselves but still have a conversation.
How do you anticipate directing your patrons where to park? Should they be driving to you?
From the number of times I've been down here in meeting with the space, I'd probably direct them into the city lots, and it kind of seems like the corridor, the goal is to be a place that you could come, eat dinner at one place, continue to walk. So as of right now, we would just kind of encourage people to use the city and parking as much as possible.
And your employees as well?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Open up the public hearing. Anyone who would like to comment on this case, you're welcome to come up to the microphone. Close the public hearing.
You get a pass on this one.
And turn to fellow commissioners for discussion.
Well, I will stand in line with all the businesses that are encouraging you. The space has been an eyesore for a long time, so thank you for taking down the plywood and opening up the windows. I'm supportive of this project.
I would echo that. I live a couple of blocks away, so it's good to see something going here now, and instead of the old cardboard. For like the parking concerns and things of that sort, I'm not as concerned about that. I know either I walk there or a lot of people that I know who want to walk around Wethy just Uber. So parking is not that big of an issue, but I am very glad to see something going there.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think many of the businesses in the area don't have any on-site parking, and it seems to work out just fine, as I also frequent the area, so I would support.
Although not officially adopted, you may recall several years ago that the Wealthy Street Business Alliance did prepare a position paper, if you will, that helped maybe to convey their desired uses as it related to Wealthy Street. And I'll just note that this area is within what they defined as retail TBA uses, meaning that they were less supportive of office uses being located in these blocks. So this application or request would seem to align with the intent of what they had hoped for this block within their district.
I just had a question about the outdoor seating hours. Is the ordinance until, because I see from Monday to Saturday, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. Is it 10 p.m. is what the ordinance is?
The ordinance is Sunday through Thursday is open until 10 p.m. and Friday, Saturday is 11 p.m. And so this appears to exceed that for most evenings. So for me, that's a bit of a pause when we're trying to encourage mixed-use neighborhoods, and we've had many cases where outdoor seating, voices carry, live entertainment, even with the ambient noise, it's still been problematic for residents that live immediate. This is a pretty dense area, small lots, so I think it should definitely give us pause to exceed those ordinance requirements.
And I would not plan on exceeding
So if the commission were supportive of that, and it sounds like the applicant is as well, I would just encourage you to watch if a motion of approval is made, that you watch number 3, and I can help if needed.
I'm willing to make a motion if we're done with discussion.
Great.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of Mammoth Distilling LLC to establish a distillery tasting room with outdoor service and alcohol sales for off-site consumption and limited live entertainment at 710 Wealthy Street Southeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will support the vitality of the local economy by encouraging investment, diversifying the economic base, and expanding employment opportunities, provide a mix of uses in a commercial area. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of Section 5.12.08.East because improvements to the buildings and site are consistent with the standards for the zone district. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed use will support the desired mixed-use character of the neighborhood. The proposed hours are consistent and compatible with similar uses already established in the area. Potentially adverse effects arising from the proposed use will be minimized because the outdoor seating area will be located between the main building and accessory structure and will be buffered from neighboring properties. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic, smoke, odors, glare, or visual clutter because the business will typically be open no later than midnight. No food preparation is proposed, mitigating smoke and odors from the site. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the reactivation of a previously vacant building will restore the street wall and help increase the vitality of the neighborhood. Adequate public or private infrastructure and services does already exist or would be provided at no additional cost and will safeguard the health, safety, and general welfare of the public because the site is currently improved with public infrastructure. Reliance on additional public services is not anticipated. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because the use is not anticipated to result in nuisances that require excessive code enforcement actions given the proposed scale, hours, and location. Given the character, location, development trends, and other aspects of the neighborhood, it is demonstrated that the area is underserved by the proposed use and that the proposed location for alcohol sales will demonstrably be an asset to the neighborhood because, as proposed, the use will be unique as compared to existing uses in the neighborhood. The use or change in use as constructed and operated by the applicant is compatible with the neighborhood because the proposed hours of operation are consistent with other establishments in the vicinity. Adjacent or nearby parks, playgrounds, religious institutions, or schools will not be adversely affected because sale of packaged alcohol is anticipated to be purchased by patrons visiting the tasting room and not generally by walk-in visitors. The use as proposed to be operated by the applicant will not have any or minimal negative secondary effects on the neighborhood because the use will be relatively small in scale and the hours will be limited. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval apply to this project, and they are noted on the screen with a change to number 3. Or no, not number 3.
It's just as previously read.
Those are just.
Oh, as previously read. Number 2, the hours for packaged alcohol sales associated with the primary tasting room shall be consistent with the general operating hours of the business being Monday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 12 a.m., and Sunday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. 3, that the hours of outdoor seating shall be Monday through Saturday. Is this where we wanted to change that? 11 a.m. to 10 p.m.?
Would you like to say Sunday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., and Friday, Saturday, 11 p.m. to 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., consistent with the ordinance?
Yes. Thank you. Number 4, that the area of packaged alcohol display shall be consistent with the submitted floor plan and testimony, specifically in the built-in shelving unit adjacent to the basement stairs near the front of the store.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Now we will have a public comment period. Any member of the public is welcome to come up, share your thoughts with the commission for up to 3 minutes.
Hello, Brandon Bilski again. I am happy to come in here and talk with you, and I know I appreciate Kyle for calling out my antics a bit, but I certainly don't want to waste your time. I think slowing down a little bit at this body to really take stock and to examine deeply just our values and what we can do, and really acknowledge that you are in a position to do great good. I know that the issues are complex, but we've got 2 different land trusts coming out and certain positive things that can really help the community. But with your eye and with your position, we can still do so much more and creatively, like going out into the community and asking what they need. Like, we've got this master plan and we're planning for the next 20 years. But within that, the fact that we only gave $6 million to affordable housing, and that goes up to so much in matching funds, that is a drop in the bucket compared to what we truly need. And let's look at how much the city is giving. How much is our tax-paying dollars going into this vital issue on the lowest level for people who desperately need it? I just want to point out that 50% of the people who come into shelter only stay in for 6 months. So it is a rotating, revolving door of just everyday people going in for services. Let's not shame people who need help. Let's not, it could be any one of us that has a medical issue. Okay? Very complex. But because it could be any of us, it demands all of us for a solution. And for that, what does it mean for each of us on this body to be bold? I'm not giving you exact specifics, but please give me a call, sit down with me. I'm here to serve you, to help you, to hear from you. I'm on the front lines writing grants to ensure that everyone's taken care of, that everyone gets to eat, and that at the end of the day, we're helping everyone thrive. And let me point out too that it is cheaper to house people that are homeless. That there are, as much as it would cost $1 billion, it would be $2 to $6 billion of unaccounted for cost, of all the times we have the emergency services coming to help the homeless, of all the people who go untreated for mental health illness, which is the root cause of most crime, and the culture. These being pretty basic facts, many of us know. Many of the reports and acknowledgments about affordable housing are around these issues. But the action, the motu we get, the thing we stand for as a city, at its core is not being honored because it is private institutions that are doing everything on this to help the most vulnerable. So what can we do together? And it's changing lives and saving souls. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll close the public comment period. Commissioners, any more business for us? Then we are adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, you have to, is that how you get it? Yeah. That's a great thing to do. Well, I'm going to see